This video is going to be a strange one. In a departure from my usual fare, today's topic touches not only on how we make decisions and build worlds in our fiction, but it also touches on a very real phenomenon occurring right now in this world. This is because I feel that right now, decisions that are being made by wealthy would-be technocrats are more influenced by worlds of fiction than they ever have been. And I think they're learning the wrong lessons. So today I want to make a case that human-like robots, constructs, machines, steampunk-style automata should almost never exist in any reasonably thought-out world, including our own. Not from some sort of place of fear that they'll rise up against us, or we'll not be able to tell them apart from real people, or the uncanny valley. I'm not going to mention any of that in this video. We're just going to look at three key areas where automata usually emerge in the narrative of a world of fiction: warfare, dangerous labour, and service labour. And I want to assess a few fundamental forces that I feel work diametrically opposed to a humanoid robot solution. Starting with warfare, I do want to stress that throughout all warfighting in human history, the end goal remains broadly consistent. Diminish enemy resources to put pressure on their ability to maintain a force, which in turn is intended to reduce their willingness to fight to a point that they must abandon their positions and or surrender. It's really that simple. Where complexity comes, of course, is in the details. Resources here can mean soldiers, ammunition, horses, or food, and methods of resource diminution can range from disrupting supply lines, to enforcing sieges and blockades, to more outlandish things like dropping nuclear warheads or bioengineering a plague to specifically target the species that you're fighting. Human-like stand-ins may seem like a wise solution here, a prime example being Eberron's Warforged, because frankly a humanoid robot seems to solve a few key problems in the warfighting flowchart. Namely, they cannot be so easily and permanently destroyed as a resource due to the possibility of salvage and repair, and the willingness of a non-human robot to fight is theoretically indefatigable. Yet making a mechanical soldier that looks and acts like a human would, I maintain, be utterly foolish. Even if, as they're often depicted, they're better than human soldiers in almost every way. Firstly, in worlds where the tech level allows for remote wars fought between machines, one would be looking to utilise the most efficient tactics possible that allow for the lowest attrition rate to your resources, which is most likely long-range targeted fire and bombing. If you're wanting an entity that can shoot at long range, you've already designed the gun. Just stick wheels and a pathfinding algorithm onto that. You don't need to design the complexities of legs, arms, and a head with forward-facing sensors to mimic human eyes. You're just making more ways that machine can fail. A gun on wheels or treads is pretty much as good as it gets. And if you really need it, give a gun the ability to fly. Some would say, though, that it's that tactical, in-the-moment decision-making of a soldier that is the most significant thing in battle. And there is much to be said for adjusting to new information, making plans on the fly, and communicating as a squad. But machines don't need to be built with a physical, sticking-out head to make decisions in the moment. You might also argue that a bipedal body with arms allows for a more varied set of operational parameters, including climbing, straddling or jumping across gaps, and the ability to fall prone at a moment's notice. So maybe that's why all of our military drones need to look like people. Or you could argue that human-built environments are best navigated by human-shaped entities. These are good arguments. Humans got to our dominant position in this world by being very, very good generalists, but also by being some of the best persistence predators, and by adapting the environment around us to suit our own purposes. While generalism can be useful in combat, there are many armies in history and in modernity that do not focus as much on generalists. Indeed, some incredible armed forces of the past have largely trained specialists. Look at, in medieval English longbowmen, or sapeurs, or, the American armed forces. Training for specialism does work, and it can often produce quite outsized impacts when that specialism is tactically advantaged. Our current technology already promotes specialism. Flying a bomber is very, very different from flying a fighter jet, for example. You could also make one more argument for having a bog standard generalized soldier frame, much like the droids of the Clone Wars. And it's the ability to fit and synchronize and work in tandem with all sorts of other mechanical tools. In World War II, most British equipment was made with the average soldier in mind, who was supposed to be 5'7" and have a 32-inch waist. This meant that almost nobody fit in the standard seat, and it was often quite uncomfortable. But with a proper, perfectly moulded, truly identical fighting force, you could fit each one in their own machine with no tailoring to specifications, no discomfort. Or you could just install the brain part of whatever droid you're using into the machine itself and let it do its thing, rather than having two machines, one operating humanoid controls to make the other do something. It's just added mess. That's the problem, really. Yes, you can argue that there are specific environmental factors which might make a droid-style soldier the most effective tactical option. Like in built-up areas where a mix of creativity, improvisation, and independence is needed. And even then, you'd only really see a robotic soldier in such an environment if the economic and the moral costs of sending in a trained human soldier have first been debated and found cheap enough or immoral enough. Because advanced robotics capable of outperforming a soldier are expensive. Fundamentally, the mechanized humanoid soldier is never going to be the majority of a fighting force. And it may often actually genuinely be better, except, of course, morally, to use people in certain specific applications. In essence, you'd need a very specific kind of world to be set up where a humanoid robot soldier even makes any sense at all. Thankfully, with this video's sponsor, Enclave, you can set a world up just like that, with no clashing with the system that you're trying to run, and no strange complexities that come when designing for guns or combat or warfare or anything of that description. Enclave is a system which takes the mess out of tabletop gaming. You don't need dice, tables, or even randomness, really. It's all about making good decisions and telling a story. It's the bare bones of creative storytelling in tabletop role-playing games. Your characters are going to be a team of specialists, which, in this case, could very well include robots. From gunslingers to researchers to thunder-summoning, flying magic people. All types of characters can exist in this multiversal melting pot, suffused with power. It's a great time, honestly, perfect for exploring cool settings and new genres that you've not played before, with self-contained missions to provide variety and easy storytelling. As of the moment this video goes out, you have less than a week to support Enclave's big new expansion, its aspirant version, on Kickstarter, which has new classes, new systems, and more ways to customize your experience. You've not got much time, so please do get in on the action with the link in the description or the pinned comment. But we do need to get back to discussing the complex labour dynamics of employing humanoid robots. Often, in fiction, these entities are built as a way to reduce human suffering by replacing human workers in dangerous positions with machines. Machines who should be unable to feel pain, and who should also be largely fixable even if heavily damaged. In theory here, there are similarities to the warfare angle. Use robots to do the difficult, dangerous, dirty work and keep people safe. Factories, mining, repairs in space, all of these, frankly, are tasks better suited to entities that can easily have their limbs replaced, and whose loss is purely economic, not also personally tragic. Except, just like in warfare, we run into the same specialism problem. We already see it in factories. Stations in which machines perform specific actions over and over and over again. Even in factories that are not fully automated, humans are often still employed in place as parts of this assembly line, where either they perform repetitive tasks doing the same thing every time at a fixed spot in the line, or they're supervising things. In a world that has any notion of mass manufacturing, the human in said manufacturing is generally not being used for their holistic skills, their generalised skill sets, or their manual dexterity, except in cases where machines are just too expensive to replace workers. Equally, for dangerous dynamic works like mining or outer space repairs. I will say, having legs isn't necessarily helpful, especially legs that don't have the capacity to utilise continuous uninterrupted traction or suction. I believe that the intent in our science fiction and fantasy and fiction and real world intentions to use humanoid robots in these applications genuinely just belies a lack of imagination. Because we find it really difficult to conceive, as people, of a built environment that doesn't cater to the human form. So much so that our fiction often needs to oversize or outsize ventilation networks for dramatic effect, right? Air doesn't need that much space, it never has. It's air. Yet in a world where miners were not humans, but squat-wheel drills that roll through tunnels, and spaceship repairs are completed by a dedicated force of magnetised droids, which stick flatly to the outside of a ship, without cables or spacesuits or a need for air. I just think in worlds like this, where in situations like this, industrial and product design would just look very, very different. It's like approaching the challenge of deep sea fishing by sending out a bunch of guys on the back of a boat with really, really long fishing rods. Except that does happen in our real world right now, because we're humans and we're idiots. I will say for the record, commercial deep sea fishing tends not to use this method. They use lines that are far too long and far too heavy for any human or humanoid to reel in effectively. And they use nets far bigger than any human could cast. Because that's how you actually catch large enough amounts of stuff to be commercially viable. You use mechanised apparatus that is locked into the structure of the entire boat, using the entire boat's weight as a countermeasure to things that are heavy. You don't just use the reasonable strength of Bob and Dave, or, their mechanical facsimiles. The humanoid form standing on the back of a boat would, in this case, even if it were a robot, just be another point of weakness and potential failure, as opposed to just attaching a mechanised spool to the back of the boat anyway. The only way you'd ever want a humanoid robot on the back of a deep sea fishing vessel is if you're going out with him and the lads to have a day of sport, because that's the only way using actual rods and actual legs and actual fishing techniques makes any bloody sense at all. Speaking of a friendly, fun fishing trip with the lads, I think we should discuss the most plausible of all of the arguments for humanoid robots. We prefer service workers who look like us. But, well, not too much like us, as centuries of bigotry and all sorts of other behaviours have quite clearly underlined. This is the space where fiction, and indeed the modern tech world, most seeks humanoid automation. Partly because it genuinely does make some sense. We do, as a species, tend to prefer to socialise with humans. And if you do need to automate service, people generally will place more perceived value on a human-shaped agent than a box with a voice. But then again, the rise of the self-checkout as a preferred model for many shoppers does demonstrate the complexity of this issue. Making something person-shaped and person-seeming does it's true, tend to increase our willingness to engage with it in social terms, rather than as a box-ticking exercise, which makes some sense too. So let's get into some examples. First, a customer service agent, in person, someone meant to represent a business, man a desk, and direct queries to the right people. I can see the value for a large organisation to employ a multi-processing AI with full knowledge of corporate structure and policy, but why would that AI need a body? We've not properly discussed this yet, but just the engineering work needed to make walking on two legs for a robot viable is so complex and requires so many systems that even if this entity needed to physically show people around a physical space, it would be far cheaper and easier to just use wheels, ramps and elevators. What about a multi-purpose generalist housekeeper, responsible for children, cleaning, cooking and minor DIY tasks? Surely the generalism of the human form mixed with the capacity for artificial beings to potentially be experts in all tasks means that a humanoid housekeeper is the ideal choice. No, frankly, that's what inspired this whole video / rant. This is the Neo robot and it's dumb. First, the company explicitly states, to tie and round off our thesis, that it seeks to bring the science fiction idea of robots from the movie screen into reality, despite needing to be remotely piloted in some cases in these early versions by cheap human labourers. And that's not even the big issue. 1. They have visual senses where human eyes are, providing limited to no visual acuity at ground level without bending or being flat, and not making use of the fact that it's a robot. It should be able to see in 360 degrees and process video in that sense, because why not? 2. Normal human processes that are naturally learned, like adjustable grip strength based on micro slippages against fingertips, balance, proprioception, or, walking, will all need to be developed as functions of this robot. 3. Natural senses like smell and pain are very useful in navigating human environments. Sensing gas leaks or figuring out if it's caught fire recently. More expensive developments, more complexity, more feature bloat, higher cost, or leave them out and have some people's houses burnt down. 4. Hands aren't the best or only way to interact with an environment, even a human-made one. An elephant's trunk springs to mind as one alternative. And also, why just 2 hands at the end of rigid, non-extendable arms? Don't make a massively expensive robot that has no benefit over people in doing the tasks that people do, except for the fact that it means a person doesn't have to do them, which has its own implications, by the way, for how we view service labour in this society, which I'm not going to get into, but we probably should. If you're going to do this, at least increase utility above human benchmarks. Use more than 2 limbs that are adjustable and extendable. This actually wouldn't be one of those things that's that much vastly more expensive to incorporate, comparatively to giving it a sense of proprioception. 5. Walking. I've mentioned it before, but it doesn't make tons of sense to develop algorithms and mechanisms for bipedal movement when that is not only unnecessary but dangerous. Who wants to risk a robot tripping over and then crushing their cat or their child when it's very likely significantly more than human weight? You're better off making a non-humanoid robot with a much, much lower centre of gravity, so it's not going to tip over, with wheels or a 4 to 6 legged design, with multiple visual sensors in every direction, including some telescopic ones to reach human or ceiling level visual ranges, with flexible and extendable arms and even the ability to place itself flat on the ground with some vacuuming and washing functions underneath itself. Yes, you can't lock eyes with this soulless machine that you're trusting to take care of your home and give it a wave, but that almost feels like a plus. This whole video has been very negative. I've consistently railed against humanoid robots and near exclusively try to demonstrate their worthlessness as a concept. But outside of the kind of replicant-style perfect human facsimiles, who might as well at some point be their own people, frankly, morally, I just do see limited benefit in chasing this specific avenue of robotics. There is almost no job in our world, or any world, frankly, where the human form in its entirety is the absolute apex of mechanical function. And assuming one has solved the myriad perceptual, practical, cost and safety concerns of developing humanoid robotics, which we very much haven't yet, even if we've solved these issues, we can make better designs than ones that look like people, specialised for their tasks and their environments. Even if we really, really need these creatures to have a sense of a humanoid connection. Vocal modulations, sculpted and shaped heads and shoulders like busts put on top of these machines might well suffice enough. I don't want to leave on a sour note, though. There is one humanoid robot that I've spotted so far in all of fiction that I think is genuinely faultless and has a perfectly reasonable purpose in existing. And that's C-3PO. I might seem mad, seeing as I've just railed against the impracticality of and implausibility of a humanoid robot being useful at all in any world. I even have mentioned the service sector as a place where they might not really be helpful, except C-3PO's specific function requires a humanoid form. He's a protocol droid. His role is to serve as a mediator, translator, and etiquette coach and consultant to dignitaries across galactic systems where life comes in all shapes and sizes. His humanoid form in this specific case is actually a boon, as he is capable of physically demonstrating any greeting, gesture, bow, or specific finger position performable by a humanoid dignitary, as well as being loaded with all this information en masse, so that introductions can be made in any language on the fly. Furthermore, the limitations of his humanoid form demonstrate a harmlessness to him, as if he were to be using weapons, they would have to be held in his hands visibly. And his humanoid form allows for a recontextualization of gestures given by species that may not have the same arrangement of limbs and body parts, recontextualized through a protocol droid. They can be translated even as gestures into humanoid gestures, or translated in some sort of reciprocal fashion where the creature understands that this is the best the humanoids can do. So he can communicate non-verbally and demonstrate effective non-verbal communication to the entire delegation. C-3PO as a diplomatic tool for interspecies galactic communication is the most sensible use of the humanoid robot that I have ever seen, and it is one of the only ones that I've seen that actually makes sense. At least one that isn't just so developed and so far forward in the future that it's just basically just a person in moral and social weight. Of course, there is a meta sense to all of this. From Cybermen to C-3PO, oftentimes the easiest way to present a robot in visual media is to stick a guy in a costume and then get them to talk funny. But too often that Hollywood shortcut gets taken at face value, not just by technocratic dreamers, but by normal people, and we overlook the weaknesses that aping a humanoid form can have. How many humanoid robots are going to need regular hip or knee replacements very soon, do you think? Fantasy and science fiction, I don't expect or need or particularly want them to follow my suggestions here, in their entirety at least. Because things can often be more fun and more engaging if we just have license and freedom to make cool stuff. That doesn't need to make perfect and total sense from a practical perspective or a technological development perspective. But in our world, with limited time, limited resource, and a limited amount of projects that can be worked on by the collective human imagination, this direction in robotics to me seemed doomed from day one. accept as anything outside of a conceptual exercise in improving our understanding of robotic mechanics. And if you're wanting to flex that creativity, or you're wanting to create some limitations, or create any sort of world, and test it out and use it in a single session, in a mission that is going to be easy to understand for anyone, whether they're new to TTRPGs or not, genuinely Enclave is the best place you could start. Also, its creator, Robbie Howell, is just a really cool guy, and by helping them out, you also help out the channel. So that's another bonus if you're into that. But if not, that's fine too. Either way, Kickstarter's linked in the description down below. But with all that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the thegrungeonmaster. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.